What's up, everyone? My name is Alex, and I use he, him, his pronouns, or AMR's pronouns, and I wanted to talk about breaking gendered expectations. So basically, I want to talk about how I define and perform my gender in ways that people do not expect. And I wanted to get right into it, mostly because I have a telehealth appointment with Planned Parenthood, so good news, great stuff, but this video hopefully won't feel rushed, but I am going to try to get the video done today, so yeah, let's get right into it instead of stretching it out. So I believe that I break gender normity in two different ways, one of them being as a man amongst cisgender people. If I'm trying to pass and, the world doesn't need me to know that I am trans, I, like other cis guys, cis guys don't know much about me in that sense. So, as a man in groups with other men, particularly cis people, but also as a non-binary person within the queer community, there's always some kind of expectation as to what that means being a man and being non-binary. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to go over today, and hopefully it makes sense. I thought it was an interesting topic to talk about. I feel like as a man I have a somewhat unique view of my body. There's assumptions on how I should view my body. Trying to pass as a man, I think there's expectations of if you want to pass as a man, these should be your goals, transition-wise or surgery-wise. But I feel like I have kind of a unique view in that I am I'm okay with the bottom part, not so much the top. I have chest dysphoria. I think a lot of my bodily views, or just views in general on how I'm passing, is partially based in dysphoria, partially based in euphoria. I guess it just depends on the particular thing, but I feel like there's an expectation that I should be dysphoric about the whole thing and want to change the entire thing, which is not true. I think my ideal transition goals is top surgery, but not so much bottom surgery. I'm dysphoric about my voice and my stature, whereas I'm euphoric about other things. Femininity being an important aspect of my identity, even if it's not my identity isn't based on femininity. It's kind of a separate thing, but it's still a part of how I present myself. Not a lot of people expect that from a transgender man. Men in general, it's still kind of an uncommon thing in cis male groups. Femininity just isn't really a thing that you see. It totally depends on what kind of men you're hanging out with, I guess. But day-to-day life, at work and stuff, that's everyone's real masculine, and it doesn't nobody thinks about being masculine or feminine. That's not a thing that enters people's minds. So I guess I kind of stand out in that I enjoy femininity and I think about masculinity and how I'm performing that masculinity. Fluid gender presentation that rarely affects my actual gender. Being gender non-conforming, I think people conflate it with gender fluidity. You can be fluid in presentation without having a fluid gender. My gender's pretty static. It's just what do I feel comfortable in wearing? How do I feel how comfortable do I feel presenting in a certain way. Like that's something I think about that like other men don't typically think about, like largely. I guess I'm seeing this in the scope of like being a trans man in cis male groups, I guess is like where this is mostly coming from. But even in like in some like trans male groups, there's an emphasis on masculinity, on passing, on being this static gender. Like I call myself a man, and I don't really like go further than that. Sometimes I'll say demiguy, but the emphasis is that I'm still a man. So there's the expectation that that is the gender I'm performing and have to pass as, and I have to look the part, I have to act the part. So that gets us into the topic of queering masculinity or defining masculinity. I feel like my masculinity and my malehood are kind of seen through a neutral lens. I cannot really place a specific language. I don't know if there are labels for gender neutral men or men who experience gender in a neutral way. I just haven't really adopted that kind of language, so I go for literal gender neutral maleness, malehood, not hyper masculine, not strictly a binarily masculine man, not completely outside of being binarily masculine. Masculinity for me is really only for passing. That is the overall goal of being masculine for me. So it's not as important to me as a man to be masculine in the same way that it's important it's not important for me to be masculine in the same sense that like it's important for like cisgender men to be masculine. I kind of have a different definition and a different way of performing masculinity that is very tailored to my gendered experience, I suppose, is the best way. I've got the occasional feminine / neutral days, still being masculine with that layer of femininity. I have that video on layers of identity where I talked about femininity being like an outer layer of my identity that doesn't really affect my masculinity, doesn't affect my gender, but it's still a part of the entire thing that I call my identity. Is just playing with gender, queering masculinity. That's where that is coming from. Just kind of giving myself a new definition of masculinity that fits my experience. And of course, I don't consider my masculinity the same thing as my maleness. I know a lot of people, their malehood, their masculinity is inseparable. For me, I see them as two different things, but the masculinity, again, is important in passing as male, so that's kind of the only way they're really tied together, other than the fact that I like passing as male and being able to be gender non-conforming. And of course, like, I've got a largely masculine appearance in my day-to-day life at work and stuff. I'm usually pretty masculine in presentation and everything, but mannerisms, not so much. I'm starting to become more comfortable in not having to act the part, not having to act like all the cis men that I'm surrounded with every day. So there's also that where like I pass physically, but I don't, like, that's kind of as far as it goes. I don't really have like really masculine mannerisms. I don't think I do. So how I break gendered expectations as a non-binary person, you wouldn't think that there were really any expectations as a non-binary person. People don't expect me to be a certain way as non-binary, or at least you would kind of think that with like what non-binary is and how flexible a term that is and how many different identities and gendered experiences that encompasses. But I've run into some really odd issues where I am a non-binary man. I'm not a non-binary person. I don't like when people degender me, using neutral language or using they, them pronouns to refer to me like that. Like, no, I'm still non-binary. I just do not use completely neutral language to refer to myself. I prefer to be called a man. And also I'm not male aligned. Like, I guess there's also the expectation of, like, if I'm non-binary, I should be using some kind of alignment system, but that does not fit. Like, that just isn't my experience. I do not use an alignment system to talk about my gender or to categorize my gender in any way. I've done videos questioning whether or not I might have some kind of alignment, but otherwise that's not... like, I've questioned, but the bottom line is that I just don't use that kind of language to refer to myself. Being non-binary and gendered, usually people outside the queer community assume non-binary is just genderless, and has no connection to the binary in any form. I think there's the confusion of... just the word non-binary, I guess. Like, that's where you're getting that assumption. So being non-binary and gendered, using he, him pronouns, male presenting, male passing, male related gender terms, like referring to me as a man, like, that's not something... that's not something a lot of people normally see, I guess. Like, obviously, non-binary men and women exist. It's just such a complicated kind of gendered experience, and it's really hard to, I guess, break away from those expectations. Like, I don't know. The expectation of being genderless or non-gendered as a non-binary person. I have a partial relation to the binary as a non-binary person. I'm a demi-guy. That is a non-binary man, but people tend to see it demi-gender and non-binary as two different things, it feels like. They seem to think that demi-guy is a more gendered experience than non-binary, and that non-binary is separate and non-gendered and not related to the binary at all. So I don't think people realize that a demi-guy and a non-binary man are pretty much the same thing. Not quite the same thing, but a demi-guy can be considered a non-binary man, I guess is what I should say. And also, the very common experience with demi-guys is being part male and part genderless. That is not my particular experience. That other part that's not male, I haven't quite figured that out. I usually just say neutral, something neutral, because I just don't know, but it's not genderless. No part of me is genderless. I'm very much a gendered person. Dysphoric of they, them pronouns. That's normally people hear non-binary and immediately, like, they, them is, like, assumed to be the pronouns. It's fine if you, like, don't know the person's pronouns, but I prefer he, him. I don't do he, they. I don't use they, them at all. I actually use he, a, but that's a different story right there. But I do not like people using they, them pronouns or degendering me. I think I've done a video on that. When you choose to use gender neutral language or non-gendered terminology for someone when they are explicitly not an ungendered or non-gendered person, like, that's called degendering. Like, they have a gender, they have pronouns that they, like, want to use, but people opt to use neutral language instead. It's a form of misgendering, but it's a very specific experience that, like, I'm trying to avoid as a non-binary person. And I talked about the rejection of alignment systems as a whole. not being male aligned, not mask aligned. I don't consider the feminine part of my identity to be femme aligned, and I don't say I'm unaligned. Because there's also expectations and assumptions when you say you're unaligned. Because then that just sounds like I'm an absolutely genderless, non-binary person, and that doesn't really help the case of like breaking that expectation of genderedness. But I did do a video on alignment. That's in the Identity Talk playlist, and also I have a playlist for like gender-related videos specifically, so you could also find that there. I talk about the parts of my identity, and I talk about, rejecting alignment systems completely. I thought of using an alignment system to like describe like other parts of my gender, but I don't think it really helps me to specifically explain what my gender experience is. It's easier if I just reject it altogether. So I guess my only closing statement is gender is often about performance, like performing that gender, and I feel like in every way possible I am breaking the expectations of that performance, in the way that I present, in the way, like the language I use to refer to myself, within cisgender male spaces, within non-binary spaces, gender and sexuality. I feel like I'm breaking expectations and breaking, not stereotypes, but just breaking convention, breaking people's assumption on what my identity is like and what my gender experience is like. So I guess that's the entire thing. I didn't know how to close out this video. I kind of wrote it pretty quickly. It was a random idea that came to me, and I was like, I would love to talk about performing gender and what people expect of that gender. And I just kind of quickly wrote stuff down, and just kind of threw this video out there. But I thought it was interesting to explore, talking about, just breaking convention, queering gender, being gender queer. I guess that's what that actually is. The very original definition of gender queer versus what it is now known as non-binary. I think gender queer fits best when talking about this kind of gendered experience for me. But yeah. So question of the week: how do you break gender expectations? In general, like pronoun usage, presentation, language that you use to refer to yourself, being a specific gender but performing that gender in a specific way. I don't know, let me know. I will try to remember to post this question in the Discord server for this channel. I keep forgetting to post them, but I'm going to try to remember to post these every week. No idea if I'm going to do that, but you can still respond to the question in the Discord server, or you can respond in the comments, and I'll be there to reply to them. I always love hearing what other people have to say, how people are responding to the content and interacting with the community. That's always really nice to see. So I have my appointment in 20 minutes. I'm not prepared at all, but it's whatever. So I am signing off for now. See you later.